Today, we are looking at a submitted piece of fast-paced political and cultural commentary that critiques Tucker Carlson's ideological shifts, leverages analysis from Ben Shapiro, and reviews upcoming conservative media project. But, the pacing and thematic transitions between highly serious political accusations and just casual, unrelated banter really dilutes the overall impact and gravity of the core argument.
Yeah, absolutely. When you look at the actual flow of the text, you immediately notice this structural tension that fundamentally undermines the speaker's authority.
Right.
Like the listeners being asked to process high-stakes geopolitical analysis in one breath and then mundane personal grievances in the next. It creates a cognitive dissonance that the audience just cannot resolve.
It really does. If I'm looking at this structurally, the weakness is undeniably the tonal whiplash. The material jumps straight from these incredibly heavy historical allegations about Tucker Carlson's shifting views on Islam and Judaism directly into a deeply personal and, almost mocking rant against a daily internet stalker who keeps getting banned from their page. And it doesn't stop there.
Oh, far from it. From that personal grievance, the narrative pivots back to a highly tactical analysis of the Republican Party provided by Ben Shapiro.
Which is pretty dense stuff.
Exactly. And then it moves into a review of a movie called Citizen Vigilante, seamlessly slides into a sponsored ad read for hangover pill called Cheers Restore.
Wait, really?
Yeah, just because the speaker has an upcoming 40th birthday dinner. And then it finally ends on a visceral reaction to a terror-themed movie trailer for a project called Infidel.
Oh, wow. So organizing an argument is like serving a multi-course meal. You don't serve the appetizer, drop the restaurant bill on the table, and then bring out the main course.
Right, exactly.
You instantly destroy your own authority, moving back and forth between calling someone an anti-Semite and advertising a liver support supplement completely shatters the listener's immersion.
That's clearly laid out.
I wonder, though, if we've considered the psychological toll this takes on the listener.
What do you mean?
Well, when you transition from discussing the perceived marginalization or extermination of a demographic directly into a promo code for feeling better after a few glasses of Prosecco.
Yeah, that's a rough pivot. It really is. You are inadvertently signaling to the audience that the political stakes you just raised aren't actually that high. The gravity evaporates. The listener subconsciously categorizes the entire broadcast as casual entertainment rather than serious commentary.
Totally. So the suggestion here to fix this weakness is to group the content into distinct thematic blocks and use deliberate transitional framing to separate the serious commentary from housekeeping, personal anecdotes, or sponsorship.
Yeah, you have to build firewalls between the different types of content. The immediate concrete fix is to physically move that stalker segment to a pre-show or post-show housekeeping block.
Right. Just get it out of the middle.
Exactly. It needs to be entirely cordoned off from the political analysis. Like, if you want to address a troll in your community, that's perfectly fine. Community building is part of this medium. But do it before the curtain rises on the main intellectual event, or long after it falls.
As I understand it from the notes, the argument here is that the political analysis needs its own dedicated space to breathe. But even beyond just physically moving the blocks around, I feel like the text needs connective tissue. Like, if you're moving from a dense analysis of Tucker Carlson and Ben Shapiro into an entertainment section discussing Citizen Vigilante and Infidel, you can't just abruptly change the subject.
No, definitely not. A concrete way to build that structural bridge would be to use a framing device that links the two seemingly disparate topics.
Okay, like what?
Well, for example, you could say something like, speaking of how these ideological shifts and political anxieties manifest in our broader culture, let's look at the media currently being produced to cater to this exact audience.
Oh, that's good. That graceful pivot introduces the Daily Wire's Infidel, not as a random trailer you happen to watch over the weekend, but as a cultural symptom of the exact political landscape you just spent 10 minutes analyzing.
Exactly. It makes the whole piece feel cohesive, like a single overarching thesis rather than just a random assortment of thoughts.
Right. But, even if you fix the structural traffic jam and you finally have a clear path to make your case, you still have to ensure the foundation of the argument is solid.
Which brings us to a massive hurdle in the text itself.
Yeah. The primary argument critiquing the subject's shifting political ideologies relies too heavily on character attacks, which obscures the far more compelling strategic analysis present in the text.
This is a classic case of a writer accidentally burying their own strongest point. The material contains a genuinely robust, high-level piece of political analysis, but it's hiding underneath a mountain of personal disdain for the subject.
Yeah, if we look at how the source material charts this out, it spends a lot of time mapping Tucker Carlson's ideological shift. It points out that the 1990 or 2012 normie Republican version of Carlson would be completely unrecognizable to the 2026 version.
Right.
But instead of leaning into the mechanics of why that shift happened, the weakness is that the material buries its strongest logical point, which is Ben Shapiro's observation that Carlson is attempting a splinter faction strategy to leverage the Republican Party beneath these extended ad hominem attacks.
Yeah, the bulk of the argument rests on a lengthy comparison between Carlson and Matt Damon's character from the 1992 movie School Ties. You know, the preppy little prick who hides his true prejudiced nature from his classmates?
Is the School Ties movie analogy inherently bad? Because from an engagement standpoint, it paints an incredibly vivid picture for the reader.
It really does.
It's an accessible pop culture reference that immediately characterizes the subject for anyone who has seen the film.
Sure, the analogy itself is highly engaging. The weakness is not the existence of the pop culture reference. The weakness is that the writer relies on it as the foundational proof of the subject's ideology.
I see.
Like, if you're listening to this and you write political commentary, you've probably fallen into this trap yourself, right? Letting your personal disdain for a public figure accidentally bury your best logical arguments.
Yeah, it happens all the time.
Using a fictional 1990s movie character to fundamentally prove a real-world commentator's deeply ingrained prejudice weakens the logical robustness of the piece. The psychology of the reader demands actual evidence for serious allegations.
Definitely.
When your core evidence boils down to he is just a bad person like this bad guy in a movie, the skeptical reader tunes out.
Because it distracts from the actual political maneuvering happening behind the scenes. I can see what you're going for. Let's see how we can strengthen this.
Okay.
The suggestion is to elevate the tactical analysis provided by the Shapiro segment to the forefront, using the pop culture analogies merely as stylistic flair rather than the crux of the argument.
Yeah, maximizing the impact of those compelling ideas shifts the entire tone of the piece. I think the first concrete step would be to completely restructure the opening of the Carlson critique.
How so?
Instead of leading with a visceral, personal reaction to his comments on Islam and Judaism, lead with the Splinter faction thesis.
Right, because the core insight here is that Carlson isn't necessarily trying to convince the majority of people within the mainstream Republican tent.
Exactly.
Instead, he is threatening to overturn the apple cart, walk out the door with a dedicated minority, and force figures like J.D. Vance to conform to his views just to keep the coalition together. That is a fascinating high-level observation about political leverage.
Building on that point, what if we looked at it from the perspective of how this strategy is replicated?
Okay, yeah.
The material actually makes a strong case for this by highlighting how other figures like Candace Owens and Nick Fuentes operate using this exact same splinter strategy. That is the intellectual anchor. That is the argument you want front and center.
So once you have established that tactical anchor, then you can deploy the School Ties analogy?
Right.
But instead of using Matt Damon's character to simply say, Tucker is a bad person, you use the analogy to illustrate how he masks his splinter strategy from his audience. You shift the goal of the analogy. It becomes about the mechanics of deception rather than just a character assassination.
Exactly. It elevates the so what factor of the entire piece. You move the protagonist, the writer, from a position of personal grievance to a position of high-level political analysis.
Yeah, which is so much stronger.
By focusing on the how and why of the strategy, the critique becomes exponentially more robust and persuasive to an audience that might not already agree with you.
But, once you have that foundational logic locked in, that splinter faction thesis at the core, you still have to deliver it. And the way you deliver it determines who actually sticks around to listen.
Oh, for sure.
The highly visceral and emotional language used to describe ideological opponents and cultural artifacts risks alienating listeners who might otherwise be persuaded by the underlying political logic.
Yeah, this is where we run into a major roadblock regarding audience alignment and persuasion. You can have the best structural flow and the tightest political logic, but if your vocabulary signals that you are operating purely on rage, you lose the room.
Let's look closely at the section discussing the movie reviews. The weakness here lies in the specific language chosen by the speaker. When discussing the movie Citizen Vigilante, the text casually talks about being down to clown with getting civilian justice against Islamic freaks.
Yeah, that's pretty intense.
Right? And later, when reacting to the audio in the trailer for the movie Infidel, which features news clips of terror warnings in Virginia and Michigan, the speaker describes the noises making their skin crawl, calling it demonic, and attributing their repulsion simply to loving Jesus.
It's highly charged, almost apocalyptic rhetoric. And while this kind of visceral, emotional language caters very strongly to the most ardent, pre-existing base, it sacrifices the objective, analytical high ground that the speaker literally just established during the Shapiro breakdown.
Yeah.
It shifts the tone from a thoughtful, principled critique of radicalism to an overly emotional, reactionary stance.
But doesn't raw emotion build a stronger connection with the listener? I mean, the speaker is expressing genuine fear and anxiety about real-world events. That vulnerability, that visceral reaction to a trailer showing terror warnings in American cities can be highly engaging.
It can. But when the emotion overshadows the logic, especially right after criticizing Carlson for being hysterical and lunatic, it risks making the speaker sound just as reactive as the target of their critique.
That's a good point.
Is there a risk that focusing solely on this emotional revulsion might overlook the opportunity to dissect why this media exists in the first place? I mean, if you call someone else hysterical, your own house must be perfectly calm and collected. You cannot claim the intellectual high ground while simultaneously matching your opponent's emotional volatility.
No, you really can't claim the intellectual high ground if you're screaming. You have to cool the temperature of your own writing if you want your political analysis to be taken seriously.
Absolutely.
The actionable suggestion here is to calibrate the emotional rhetoric to match the analytical tone of the stronger political segments, focusing the critique on the ideologies and cultural impacts rather than visceral revulsion.
To implement this concretely, we need to look at how a cultural critic would approach this material. Like, when discussing Citizen Vigilante, instead of saying you are down to clown with fighting freaks, the writer needs to step back and analyze the phenomenon. You frame the movie's appeal around the cultural desire for justice.
So you could rewrite that section to say something like, it's no surprise a movie like Citizen Vigilante is gaining traction right now. It speaks directly to a demographic that feels highly anxious about safety in the current political climate, and it offers a fictionalized, civilian-led catharsis to those real-world fears.
Yes, exactly.
That acknowledges the appeal of the movie without stooping into the mud.
And we apply the exact same logic to the Infidel trailer reaction. Instead of calling the noise demonic or attributing the fear simply to loving Jesus, the writer should explore why the Daily Wire is creating these parallel entertainment structures in the first place.
Right, because a movie like Infidel doesn't exist in a vacuum.
Exactly. It serves as a direct cultural response to the exact geopolitical fears outlined in the Carlson and Shapiro segment.
So the writer could say, this trailer is highly effective because it weaponizes the very real news headlines we discussed earlier, like the terror warnings in Virginia and Michigan, and packages them into a parallel entertainment ecosystem for a conservative audience seeking validation of those specific anxieties.
That is so much stronger.
What I really like about this approach is that it ties the entire commentary together. The political analysis at the beginning directly informs the cultural analysis at the end.
It really does. It transforms the piece from a series of disjointed emotional reactions into a cohesive, sweeping critique of how political strategy bleeds directly into pop culture. It fulfills the ultimate purpose of the piece, to make the listeners smarter, more observant, and more aware of the tactical maneuvers happening around them.
Well, let's pull all of this together. We've covered three main pillars to strengthen this material. First, we address the structural flow. The writer must group their content into distinct thematic blocks and build deliberate transitional framing to prevent tonal whiplash, ensuring that the gravity of the political commentary isn't undermined by unrelated banter or sponsorships. Second, we tackled completeness and focus. The writer needs to elevate the tactical Splinter faction political analysis over the personal character attacks, using pop culture analogies to explain the mechanics of deception rather than relying on them as foundational proof. And finally, we looked at tone and style. The writer must calibrate their visceral, emotional language to maintain an authoritative, objective tone throughout the entire piece.
Yeah, the actionable steps here are clear. Group your housekeeping and ads into separate, dedicated blocks. Lead your main argument with the tactical Splinter faction thesis. And when reviewing media, analyze its cultural impact rather than just providing a raw emotional reaction.
We invite the writer to take these suggestions, revise the structure and tone of their work, and submit it back in for further review. We always love seeing how a piece evolves when the intellectual anchor is fully supported by the structure around it. Until next time, keep refining, keep challenging your own work, and keep analyzing the world around you.